Hello everybody and welcome to my spoiler review for Captain America Brave New World. I can talk about all the things that I couldn't talk about in my regular review, although I guess it should probably go without saying, but this is a spoiler review. So if you don't know what happened in the movie, or if you don't want to know, then you should probably pause this video, then go see the movie, then come back and watch it later. But if you don't care about spoilers, then let's move ahead and let's talk about the latest Marvel film. I'm actually glad that I can go back and do these spoiler reviews because my first impression of a movie is literally just that. I mean, I did my first review less than 12 hours after I saw it the first time. I saw it the night before, the embargo dropped the next morning, and so I can sit there and I can process and I can think, but I'm also on a timeline. And so usually what I do with a spoiler review is I go back, I see the movie a second time, and generally my opinion, if it does shift, it doesn't always, usually won't be that much. Sometimes it'll go up a little bit higher, sometimes it'll drop a little bit. And I found with this movie that my opinion of it dropped a bit. So if we're looking at my personal scale in my first review, I think I edged it just into like the bottom level of its good territory. Now I think I would put it just a little bit lower into the top part of its fine territory. And it seems like audiences so far seem to be agreeing with that. When you look at the movie's cinema score, which is a poll that is taken of people that go see the movie on opening night at theaters across the country, Captain America Brave New World scored a B-, and this is a little bit of a preview of Charts with Dan, which is going to come out after opening weekend. That B- cinema score is the lowest in the history of the Marvel Cinematic Universe. It's lower than Eternals and Ant-Man and the Wasp, Quantumania, and the Marvels, which previously had the lowest score at a B. And on the Marvel scale, that's pretty bad, because if you look at that chart, prior to 2021, the MCU had produced one film that was at a B+ or below on cinema score. That was the first Thor movie. 6 of their last 10 movies have now scored B+ or below. So let's go back and talk about why that might be, why this dropped a little bit in my estimation on rewatch. And for me, the biggest problem with this movie is the writing. I just don't think that this was a very well-written film for most of its runtime. You had individual scenes here and there, but largely, especially in the first 2/3 of the film, the writing just wasn't that great. A lot of it was kind of cliche-ridden, you know, I'm sorry to disappoint you, that kind of thing, like those kind of cheesy action movie one-liners.
Damn, nobody saw that.
And then so much of the writing was expository, what we call laying pipe, and people snicker at that, but having to tell the background information about a movie or the plot, or fill people in on things they might not know from previous movies or previous shows. Movies can often do that well. I don't think this movie did it very well.
Oh, with all due respect, sir, when you passed the Sokovia Accords, you tore the Avengers apart. Why the change of heart?
There was a lot of newscasts at the beginning of the movie, which is a really cheap way to put exposition into a film. I thought that the scene between Sam and Isaiah at the gym before they go to the White House was very obvious exposition. I don't know if that was part of the reshoots. And then we know that everything with Sidewinder, who's played by Giancarlo Esposito.
Hello, my name is Giancarlo Esposito.
Was added in reshoots, which means that the entire scene that he has with Sam, where he lays out all of Samuel Stearns' history and the backstory and really everything that's going on in the plot with President Ross, that was all reshot, and I think to clean and streamline the exposition, and it seemed very obvious why that scene was there. There have been conflicting reports, but I still feel like a lot of the reshoots were in the first half. Knowing that Giancarlo Esposito was completely added to the film in reshooting means that at least part or all of the opening action scene where they're recovering the adamantium was a reshoot, as was the entire Stearns exposition scene that I talked about, the fight in the middle of the movie, and at least part of Sam's return when he goes back and they track down Stearns' location because he's changing clothes and all that stuff. That's pretty significant, and I've seen a lot of people argue that the reshoots weren't that big of a deal, that it was overblown, and from what's been reported, I would disagree, because supposedly there were 20+ days of reshoots on top of a 100-day or so shooting schedule. That's 20% more time shooting. I think that that's significant. And then the fact, when you look at what it is that was actually reshot, these were critical pieces of exposition telling the entire plot of the movie. they obviously reshaped the DNA, the skeleton of this movie, and it's obvious from the fact that there were actors like Seth Rollins and Rosa Salazar that were originally cast in the movie, that shot their scenes, that were reportedly part of Serpent, which makes me think that everything regarding Serpent, including the entire opening of the movie, was redone. And when you look at the movie itself, there are 5 credited writers for the story and the screenplay. There are 3 more writers that are credited with additional material. That speaks to a lot of cooks in this kitchen, especially when you compare it to a movie like Captain America: The Winter Soldier. Similar vibes, same franchise. That movie had 2 writers, Marcus and McFeely, who also wrote Endgame, at least when you're looking at credited writers. There were also some pieces for me that didn't add up in the editing, like Stearns going to the Admiral's house, which I didn't really find any reason for or why he went there specifically, or the timing for when he's captured at the end of the film, because we go from Sam at the hospital where he says he's going to go outside and get some air. Then we see Stearns at a completely different location where he kills Sam's friend who's helping him analyze the gamma pills. That friend, I think, was added maybe during reshoots. That location seemed to have been. So I think that that was either a reshot scene or part of a weird original scene that was kind of squeezed in there. Then we go to the Oval Office where the president's about to make his speech. And then we go back to the hospital where Sam is outside getting air, but now Stearns is there having traveled from a completely different location. It just feels like the pieces were kind of jammed together. And I think that it was pretty obvious that Tim Blake Nelson was shot entirely on green screen in that conversation with Sam. It's all shot, reverse shot. He, at least, Tim Blake Nelson, seems very, to my eyes, obviously composited into the scene there. They don't really interact at all. I think they might have used a body double for Anthony Mackie's parts. So even the stuff that maybe wasn't reshot, it didn't really mesh into the editing very well, which again, I think, to me, underscores the fact that these were significant reshoots and reshoots that made the movie feel a lot more fragmented. And in general, I think the movie's biggest flaw, reshoots aside, is that when you look at the screenplay, it was largely all plot, no character. For example, Layla Taylor, who is Sam's friend that works in the White House, President Ross's #1 confidant, his Secret Service agent. This is a character that we've never seen before, and she's never really introduced to us in a character sense. She just jumps right in. Ross is talking to her like they've been best friends forever. Sam is talking to her like they've been best friends forever. But if this is a new character, you've got to give us something about her background, some reason why she's such a good friend to Sam. But there's no explanation done whatsoever, and so you don't really attach to that character because you've been given nothing to go on. Similarly, Ruth Batsteroff is just introduced as the president's security advisor, and oh, by the way, she's also a former widow. We never really get to know her as a character either, and there was so much controversy around her inclusion in the film. I wasn't really plugged into that because I try not to plug into a whole lot of external stuff before a movie comes out. I just want to see the movie as a movie first. But it almost feels like a waste of a controversy because her being from Israel really played no significant part in who her character was. It really could have just been anybody. You could have picked anybody from Black Widow and put them in there because, again, they didn't do any setup. We didn't get to meet her. She wasn't introduced previously before. And I guess it's possible that her role in the film was diminished, or maybe her Israeli heritage in the film was diminished in editing and or reshoots. But even if that's the case, I don't really know how much difference that could have made because I don't see how her role really could have been meaningful in any way in any version of this movie. And when we talk about the importance of character scenes, one of my favorite in the movie was at the very, very end of the film with Sam and Joaquin Torres in the hospital at the end when he's saying he wants to be the new Falcon and Sam inspired him as a kid to be a hero. And there's such an emotional connection between those actors and those characters in that scene. That is something that should have been at the end of Act 2 in the movie when Sam's self-doubt was at its highest point, when he needed something to inspire him to go out and be his own superhero and step out of the shadow of Steve Rogers. That kind of emotional scene between those characters would have been perfect at that point. It would have deepened the audience's emotional connection to both of them, and yet the movie decides to only do it at the end, once all the action is gone, and once that emotional energy really has nowhere to go. Sure, you can carry it over into a new movie, but you're basically starting from scratch there. Another great character scene in the film was the one between Sam and Bucky, where I loved the message that Bucky was giving him, where he said, you know, you don't need the super soldier serum, or you shouldn't have taken the super soldier serum, because Steve Rogers was somebody to believe in for people, whereas you're somebody for people to aspire to, which I thought was a really good kind of distillation of what's different about Sam as Captain America versus Steve Rogers as Captain America. And then they do that Marvel thing and undercut the scene completely by making a joke. And I was sitting there just, because I was, you know, especially the first time I'm watching it, I'm like, okay, great. This is finally a good, meaty character scene. It gets to the heart of Sam's character. So much of it has been sort of this dialogue that's just moving the plot forward. But now we have a great interaction. We're getting to the heart of the movie, and then they undercut it completely with a joke. And I just don't understand. I mean, that's something that you can fix in editing, and they chose not to do it. And that is a great example of Marvel, as I think it has been doing over the last few years, indulging in its absolute worst instincts to the detriment of their projects. And speaking of Sam and not having the super soldier serum, I actually liked how the movie handled that. First of all, I liked how they did Cap's fighting style. I think that it was very tactical. It wasn't reliant on brute strength. The fact that he had the vibranium shield and the wings gave him an advantage that allowed me to believe that Sam could hold his own. Now, why he didn't choose to redirect Red Hulk's energy back at him using vibranium until the very end of the fight, I don't really know. I guess they needed a conceivable way for him to put the Red Hulk down for a second before he could talk him down. But watching it, I'm like, you have one of the only materials in the world that can absorb and redirect energy, and you don't think to do it until the very end. But I'll give it that jump in logic, just barely. But generally, I found the fact that he wasn't a super soldier to make him a more interesting character and not an unbelievable character. And it's something that I think the movie actually dealt with in a pretty realistic way. I think that this is something that a lot of people prejudged this movie on before they'd ever seen it, and something that I thought the movie was able to address in a pretty satisfactory way. I also like Tim Blake Nelson as the leader, or Samuel Stearns, since they never really called him by his comic book name. I liked the design. I thought it was very creepy. Still a nod to the big head guy from the comics, but he did seem like a gamma mutated monster. I loved how his one good green eye glowed in the dark. Admittedly, his supervillain power was very plot convenient. He is a guy who can see probabilities to such a degree that he can plan for any eventuality, like Sam inviting Isaiah to the White House last minute. You can explain that by saying, well, I'm so smart, I knew you were going to do that. Except that the probabilities are wrong when the movie needs it to be wrong, so that the story can happen. Again, you can kind of hand wave it off, but that stretched credibility just a tad bit too much for me. I did like the fact that they used I'm Mr. Blue as the trigger song for all the soldiers, because Samuel Stearns used the screen name Mr. Blue to talk to Bruce Banner all the way back in The Incredible Hulk. They were really tying off a lot of loose ends from that movie in this one. It was obvious to me that in addition to plotting the downfall of President Ross, that Samuel Stearns had time to watch movies while he was spending all those years in jail, because his plan to take down the president by playing his own words in a conversation against him over a loudspeaker while the press and the public were present was exactly the same plan that Batman used to take down the Penguin in Batman Returns. So I guess that Samuel Stearns is a Tim Burton fan.
You gotta admit, I played this stinking city like a harp from hell.
So let's talk a little bit about President Ross. I thought that Harrison Ford was really good in this role. I thought that Stearns' plan to slowly irradiate him with gamma and turn him into a Hulk was solid. I liked the scene where he confessed everything to Sam. It was very emotional. The scene where Stearns was in his ear trying to get him to turn into a Hulk, I thought was fantastic. And overall, I thought that Ross had the best arc in the movie. In a different world where Marvel's rights issues were a little more clear, I think this could have been a great Hulk film, where you still have the leader corrupting President Ross. Maybe you've got Bruce Banner doing a little bit of the investigation role that Captain America was doing here. And then the finale of the film is a Red Hulk versus Hulk showdown. You bring Betty back into it, but with Universal and everything and Marvel not able to make their own Hulk solo movie, I guess that wasn't a possibility, so they folded that as much into this narrative as they could have. I am glad that they tied Betty Ross back into the movie, but I'm still convinced that Liv Tyler was not actually there on the shooting day for her cameo. Yes, it was her voice. Yes, she was at the premiere, but watching it again the second time, she just didn't look real in that scene where she's visiting her dad at the end. Everything is in a wide shot. You never really go in close. There was some work that was done on Betty's face. Either she was deep faked or they did some kind of a weird de-aging thing, but I've looked at the pictures of Liv Tyler that were at the premiere and she looks great. I don't know why they would need to do anything with her face, especially because the same amount of time has passed between these movies as has passed in real life. I really do think that for whatever reason they couldn't actually get Liv Tyler in, or they reshot it or something, because there was something off about the way that Betty looked in that last scene. And I think it took away from the impact just a little bit because it took away from the reality of that moment, at least for me. Let me know down in the comments if that bothered you at all. As much as I loved Ross's storyline, and I thought that it was really well executed, I would actually pay money in the next Avengers film for Ross to show up right before a big battle and deliver the same lines in the same manner as Harrison Ford did in Anchorman 2, because looking back on it, I was thinking about it, their roles in those two films are startlingly similar.
You guys got room in this battle for an old war horse?
I understand that that would undercut a major character, but that would just be, that would be so perfect. I have so much more to break down about Captain America: Brave New World, but before we do, I want to thank the sponsor for this video. This video is brought to you by Manscaped. Movie history is filled with great duos. Laurel and Hardy, Scorsese and De Niro, Gerard Butler in January releases. Well, Manscaped is here with an iconic duo of their own, the Beard and Balls Bundle, the perfect solution to make sure that you look and feel your best. When it comes to personal grooming, you definitely don't want to cut corners or anything else. Manscaped offers two great tools to reduce the risk of grooming accidents: the Beard Hedger for, well, your beard, and the Lawnmower for everything down south. The Beard Hedger offers 20 adjustable settings for any kind of beard you want, from nice and tidy to Red Guardian, and the Lawnmower 5.0 has interchangeable foil and trimmer blades to ensure a comfortable experience, plus an LED light to make sure that you're staying on target. Personal grooming is something we should all be doing for ourselves and also for anyone else who might be in our lives. Everybody benefits. Both of these Manscaped devices are waterproof, allowing for easy use in the shower, and they're also travel friendly. Plus, Manscaped offers a 30-day money-back guarantee, so you can try this bundle risk-free. Don't cut corners on your grooming routine. Update to the Beard and Balls Bundle from Manscaped. Visit manscaped.com and use code Murrell to get 20% off plus free shipping. Whether you're suiting up for work, heading out for a night on the town, or just relaxing at home, Manscaped has everything you need to stay sharp. Your skin will thank you, and so will everyone else.
The country needs this.
And when we disagree on how to manage a situation, what happens then?
I know people are giving Anthony Mackie a bit of a tough time, but in the movie and in real life, he had a really hard job. He was replacing a very beloved Captain America in Steve Rogers and also in Chris Evans. I was actually disappointed that they cut the line that it was in, I think, both trailers, where the president says, "You're not Steve Rogers," and he says,
You're right. I'm not.
I think that's the key to the whole film. And I wish that we got Act 3 Anthony Mackie throughout the whole movie, because in that third act, I thought that the humor worked. I thought that his character scenes worked. I thought that we finally got to see who Sam is as a person and is as Captain America. And yet for the first two acts of the movie, he was mainly just stuck delivering expositional cliche dialogue that didn't allow either his character or the actor to shine through. So when you take an already tough task of replacing the original MCU Captain America and you add to that a really disappointing script, yeah, sure, it's Anthony Mackie, he's on set, it is his job to deliver the dialogue as best he can, but I guess what I'm saying is he was not done any favors by the creative team behind the movie. And the movie was juggling a lot, because in addition to all the Captain America stuff and the President Ross stuff, as all good Marvel movies do, it was also laying the breadcrumbs and kind of shining a light into the future. And of course, the big thing there was the introduction of adamantium, which, if you've never heard of it before this movie, you now know is a really strong metal. They didn't really do a whole lot with adamantium beyond saying the name, but I liked how they tied it in with Celestial Island, because that's a clever way to bring Eternals back into the MCU mythology in a meaningful way after ignoring it for several years. And strangely, while this movie couldn't tie its own threads together, I actually did like how it pulled into past MCU movies and tried to weave all of that into one storyline. If they'd done as good with the characters that were actually in the movie as they did with the other storylines, then I think we'd be having a different conversation right now. Sam is also tasked with reforming the Avengers, and I imagine this is going to lead heavily into Thunderbolts, especially with Bucky's involvement in that movie, so hopefully that'll be a good integration. But we also get that incredibly useless end tag where Sam visits Samuel Stearns on the raft and he says, "Oh, look out, the others are coming. There's a whole bunch of worlds out there and they're all going to be coming to get you," which, yeah, we know that as Marvel fans, as MCU fans, they've been saying that now for years. This is like the second or third end credit tag telling us all the same thing. I don't know why they thought that that was the best one for this movie. And the green screening on that one specifically, when you look at Anthony Mackie's side of it, was just awful. I mean, it looked like that scene was shot on like Tuesday, like this past Tuesday, and rushed out to get into the movie. So I don't know what was originally there, if they reshot just one side of it. But again, as with everything involving any interaction between Sam and Samuel Stearns, it all looked very sloppily assembled, as if every scene involving the two of them was rewritten in a way so that they could never actually seem to share the same space. But as well done as some of the integrations were and some of the character scenes were, I just feel like this movie was tasked first and foremost with being a piece of the MCU and shoving Captain America to the side, and that's on the writers and the director and the producers, including Kevin Feige. I'm very curious to know what the initial version of this movie looked like. We know that all of the Serpent stuff basically was reshot, adding Sidewinder in there, and there was obviously some major things that were excised. There was a funeral scene that you saw shots of in both trailers, a full state funeral with Sam in attendance. I think that's got to be either President Ross or Isaiah Bradley. And I'm wondering, because Sam and Isaiah were such a great pairing in this movie, if they looked at that and said, maybe we shouldn't do that. Maybe we shouldn't kill off Isaiah Bradley. Or maybe they killed off President Ross initially, and then everything that happened last year with all the assassination attempts and all that stuff, they said, well, maybe we shouldn't kill off the president either. But, I mean, to put it in the trailers, that to me says that this was something that was changed at a very late date, because you can control what goes in and out of those trailers. Taylor and Ruth also had some action scenes cut, because we see them wielding guns on the aircraft carrier in the trailer. And really, it seems like Disney and Marvel wanted to just play it very safe with this movie. I mean, when you look at Captain America the Winter Soldier, and I think that you can compare the two because they are similar films in many ways, and also had high stakes for Cap, because, you know, Steve Rogers and Chris Evans really proved themselves in The Winter Soldier, and I think that people were looking at Anthony Mackie and Sam Wilson to do the same in this film. But when you look at Winter Soldier, it doesn't have an explicit political message, as in I'm tying it to this politician, but it does have a very clear message about the danger of the deep state or a deep state and the necessity to fight back, especially if you are a symbol of America, to prove that America isn't just about the government, it's about the spirit and the ideals of America. And you didn't really get that in this movie. This movie, at least in its final form, was about one guy who was manipulating one other guy. Yes, it was on the world stage, but there really wasn't a bigger statement to the movie, even in a bigger sense. They didn't really have anything to say. And when I say something to say, I don't mean Captain America lecturing a bunch of congressmen to do better, because that was going too far this way. But it seems like Marvel swung the pendulum too far the other way and said, okay, we've got to make sure that nothing can really be construed as political, which is dumb because it's going to be construed as political anyway, no matter what you say. Regardless, though, it seemed like Marvel was trying really hard to say something that will please everyone and not ruffle any feathers, which you can do in some genres, but when it comes to political thrillers, it pretty much means you're saying nothing. And Disney and Marvel are the ones who decided to make this a political thriller in a very politically fraught time. Regardless of the outcome of the election, they knew, and they still know, the state of politics in this country. I don't think that it should have had a message that was pro-Trump or anti-Trump, because that in a way is far lazier than doing a deeper political message. But they didn't really even have the desire to do that. It seemed like their ambition outpaced their will And so what they did was kind of nibble on the edges of having something to say in a genre where usually you do have something to say, but they never really bit down on anything, and I think that the movie's worse for it. I said in my non-spoiler review that this could have been one of the all-time great Marvel movies, and I think it could have. This movie had so much going for it, but it only really fully delivered on the Ross storyline. Everything else, like Sam being a new Captain America, a black Captain America, who finds his loyalty, like Steve Rogers before him, as Captain America, at odds with the government itself. They never really do a whole lot with that. The idea of a corrupted genius like Stearns compromising the integrity of the US government from the shadows, it's basically just a plot point. It all seemed wasted. It most directly spoke to any issue at all with Isaiah Bradley's story of being put back in prison, back in jail from a country that left him in jail for decades to be forgotten about after they'd gotten all of the use they needed out of him. And guess what? That scene between him and Sam when he's talking to him in jail was one of the best in the movie because you know what the undercurrent is. It's unspoken. You understand the theme behind it, and yet they really didn't do that for most of the rest of the film. I think if this movie had actually had something to say, if you were able to set a better tone, if you're able to make the plot more intriguing, then I don't think you would have needed to sell this entire movie on the Red Hulk, because I think that would have been a great surprise and really gotten people buzzing if you could have saved that as something you didn't see until you went to the theater. But they didn't really have a whole lot else to market on, so they gave all of that away in the trailers. And so the people that may have been curious about it have already seen it, and now it seems like the people that do go see it aren't really going to bring back anything to people that haven't seen it yet to say, oh, but you should still go see it for this. They'll say, yeah, it had Red Hulk in it. That was about it. You can wait to see it on streaming. So once again, I'm kind of on not getting a whole lot of clicks island here by thinking that Brave New World is neither horrible nor an amazing underrated gem. For me, I think its legacy is going to be as a missed opportunity with, I think, some strong highlights. But this doesn't do anything to repair the overall image of the MCU as something that is struggling. When you look at this movie getting a B-, I don't necessarily think it's because this movie is any worse than the Marvels or anything worse than Ant-Man and the Wasp: Quantumania. I think it's an indication that the audience's patience is running out and they're no longer willing to be as forgiving of mediocrity as they may have been in the past because they have this love for the franchise or because of this promise for the future. I think that the future keeps getting promised over and over to the audience, but not really delivered in a satisfactory way. Apart from Deadpool and Wolverine, which while it's in the MCU, I think you kind of have to put over there as its own thing because it's intentionally kind of stood away from the rest of the franchise, we really are, I think, reaching an actual inflection point because you can only blame COVID for so long when you talk about how uneven the MCU has been, both as far as the shows on Disney Plus and the movies. I mean, we are nearly, believe it or not, 6 years removed from Endgame. And yet it still feels like this is a stalled franchise that is trying to get things going. And if it stays that way, then people may lose patience or may have already lost patience. And if we get to a point where the MCU has lost so much momentum that even the good movies can't get going because people are so tired of the mediocre ones, then I think that we might actually be reaching a point that the comics have never reached and probably will never reach: the end. So those are my thoughts on Captain America: Brave New World. What did you think? Did you like it more than me? Did you like it less than me? Let me know down in the comments below. And thank you so much for watching. Be sure to stay tuned right here as we get closer to Oscar Sunday. I'm going to be covering things like the BAFTAs. Of course, after this weekend, I will have a full breakdown of the box office performance for Captain America: Brave New World. And throughout the year, I'm going to have more movie news, reviews, box office, and more. Thanks to Manscaped for sponsoring this video, and thank you for watching. Until next time, stay safe, and I'll see you then. Bye.